Is fear stopping you from creating the homesteading life that you dream of? Have you read a bunch of books and done an appropriate amount of research, yet you're still waiting for a better or more perfect time to begin? Today we will discuss the courage required to start a new enterprise as we follow my foray into breeding meat rabbits. Hello, my name is Georgia. I help beginner farmers and homesteaders to build a solid foundation with livestock, naturally and intuitively from the ground up. As outlined in my introduction video, 5 years ago, life as I knew it was forever altered when I was hit head-on in my pickup truck while hauling a hay wagon, and my neck snapped. Although lucky to be alive, I have had to tone down the numbers and sizes of animals in my care. Last year, with all the talk of food shortages in the world, I thought it prudent to get my firearms license so that I could hunt if it became necessary to feed my dogs and family that way. After completing the exam, I got to thinking that I had only seen one rabbit in the past year. So where would I have to go to find a rabbit in an emergency? That is where my idea for raising meat rabbits was born. Not only were they a renewable food source, but they also fit the description of being easier to handle and butcher than, say, a herd of cattle would be. In addition to that, although I have 40 years experience with all kinds of livestock, I knew I wanted to add more options for the beginner farmers and homesteaders that would come through my programs. I've had a few pet rabbits in the past, but this was one animal that I had never bred. And since I like to do things right from the beginning by building a solid foundation, I contacted one of the top breeders of the New Zealand white rabbits in Canada, and I secured myself 4 does and 2 bucks. When they arrived last July, it was clear that they had not been handled before, and it wasn't long, and they would take treats out of my hand. I began to pet them as they would let me. But with my past injuries, I worried about how I was going to catch them and pick them up to move them into the buck's cage for breeding. You see, my son Clayton and I were planning on moving to our new farm in Nova Scotia last September already. But then when we became unavoidably delayed, our plans for rabbit breeding were put on the back burner. Our current setup of rabbit cages was supposed to be temporary, as on the new farm we plan to build large floor pens for the rabbits with some community housing where we are able to. Pens big enough that I can actually go into them and be in with the rabbits and be able to move around and not get injured. Because I was a bit nervous about breeding rabbits, I started coming up with excuses. It was a bit like the procrastinating I did with this YouTube channel, because my plan was to just start before we moved and then film the move across the country and our journey to self-sufficiency. I didn't want to start here in Ontario, and it's the same thing with the rabbits. Then when I started to come up with other excuses, the first excuse was that we didn't move, and then maybe we'd be moving soon, and so I can't breed right now. And then I thought I'd move again, and then I didn't, and then it was winter, and so likely they wouldn't breed anyway. I read the how-to books about rabbits, I talked with breeders, I did my research, and yet still I didn't start. Part of my issue stemmed back to when I was 5 years old and received my first pet gerbil that my parents gave me for Christmas. I'll never know what possessed my dad to do it, but he put the wee thing in my dad's suit coat pocket, and I was supposed to reach in there and find the present. I kept getting my fingers caught in this tiny little pocket inside his big pocket. So many times I tried, and finally I got fed up. I took my hand, I rammed it down with force, and this time, right into the big pocket. And wouldn't you know it, my sharp little fingers ran right into that little gerbil who proceeded to bite me. I didn't blame her for what had transpired, and I proceeded to keep her for the rest of her life. But sadly, we never learned to trust each other. I guess I've never forgotten my lesson that day that caged and cornered animals can bite. So I've never been too keen on keeping animals in cages anyway. So I have to admit that these rabbits in cages had me a little wary about sticking my hands and face into their personal space. Maybe that's another reason why I always gravitated towards larger animals that seemed more predictable somehow. Then one day I read a rabbit book that said in order to pick up the rabbits, you needed to not get injured, you needed to have rose gloves. The book ended up being stupid anyways, but I thought, wow, that must be the reason why I haven't tried to breed them yet. So I ordered rose gloves. I'd never even heard of rose gloves. As they were the answer to my prayers, I told myself that when they arrived, I would breed the rabbits. Waited a few days, the gloves arrived, and sure enough, they didn't fit. But then, the longer I waited to breed the rabbits, the more nervous I became. My breeder warned me that if I didn't do it soon, I may miss the opportunity because they were already almost a year old. I stopped at the local rabbitry supply dealer to pick up some new nesting boxes, as I realized the ones I had were too small for the large size that my rabbits had become. I told the owner about all my woes. I admitted that I was terrified that they were going to bite me. I was afraid to fail, about not being prepared enough, and let's not even talk about knocking off a couple baby bunnies for supper. The most useful thing he told me was that it was very unlikely that they would bite, and that he'd only been bit once by someone's pet rabbit, so that it likely wasn't an issue, that I shouldn't be worried about that. That helped, at least a little. He also said that he put the doe in with the buck the morning after a nice day. It seemed a bit like an old wives' tale, as I had already read in a book about breeding on the full moon, but at least now I had a plan. So I told my son Clayton that we would accomplish 2 firsts at once. Our first video would be rabbit breeding, and it would take place the morning after the next nice day. So that's what we did. So here I am, trying to catch a rabbit for the first time. I picked up the one that I thought would be the hardest. I have a rabbit for the first time. Oh, it's getting away on me. Okay, it's getting away. She was a handful, but I didn't give up. My 6 layers of clothes also have me look like the Michelin tire man, and it's definitely easier for me to move around in the summertime. I'd been worried about being able to tell the buck from the doe in an emergency situation, as the rabbits are solid white and devoid of any colors. So I had a bright red livestock marker, and I made a small mark on the backs of the bucks to be sure. Guinevere and Arthur were the first match. Avalon was much easier to catch and went in to be bred by Merlin. What happens next? Round and round and round we go. Both pairs mated twice in a short period of time. I recaptured the females without issue and moved them back into their pens. We waited to see if they were pregnant. So it's 28 to 35 days is the gestation period, but most often they kindle around day 31. On day 28, I put in the nesting boxes and hoped for the best. On day 32, we were blessed with our first babies. It was recommended to breed 2 does at a time, so that it really turned out to be a good idea, because Guinevere only had 1 baby, and it was cold and lonely. Avalon, on the other hand, had 6, so I was able to take 2 of the biggest out and give them to Gwen. Rabbits apparently don't mind looking after someone else's babies. The mothers only feed them once or twice in a 24-hour period. So as I checked on them each day, I made sure the kits' bellies were round. The babies ended up being much larger than I had expected. I was thinking they would be more grape-sized, considering the mother is only 10 pounds herself, but it was amazing how the kits can be born completely naked, and by day 3 they're already getting a fur coat. So what started as an idea for an emergency food source has become a way for us to produce top-quality breeding rabbits to help other homesteaders to fill on their dreams and goals. Sometimes fear stops us. When I look back at all the fuss, waiting and worrying about the rabbits, I wasted half a year, and all that really needed to happen was for me to catch a rabbit and put it in with a buck. We get so caught up in the what-ifs and what-nots, and when really, if you're working with nature, sometimes you can just let nature take its course. I teach beginner farmers and homesteaders to trust themselves, to get in touch with their intuition, that they can steer them along with the purpose-filled life with animals. For you today, I propose that you put your fears on the back burner, even just for a moment, and use some good old-fashioned common sense. Take that first step or the next step towards your homesteading dream. It doesn't matter if it's as simple as getting a book out of the library or planting some herbs on your balcony, or as dramatic as putting 2 rabbits together. They say there is never a good time to have a puppy or a baby, so use the gift that you have today of the present to move your dream ahead. Decide for yourself if you are only interested, if you are actually committed to making your dream a reality. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments about what your next step will be, and I will see you in upcoming videos. One of the next ones will include baby chick care and visit our or visit to our Sacred Eagle Farm in Nova Scotia. Stay tuned. Please feel free to like and share this video, and remember to subscribe if you haven't had a chance to already. It would be very helpful. Thank you kindly. And also, my new book is available through our website. The link is in the description.